So today we're going to be talking about the Supreme Court decision on the PASPA sports betting case. Obviously a huge day for all of us. My name is Lindsay Slader. I'm the Operations Manager of GeoComply, and I will be moderating the discussion today. Joining me are a panel of esteemed colleagues and industry professionals who are here to provide us with some initial thoughts and commentary on the Supreme Court decision that was issued today. To talk a little bit more about it, the potential implications for the legal, regulatory, and economic landscape of gambling, more specifically the U.S. sports betting industry. Our speaker lineup includes George Rover, the managing partner of Princeton Strategies, Quinton Singleton, the VP of Corporate Strategy and Government Affairs at Scientific Games Digital, Chris Groh, the Managing Director of Eilers and Krejcik Gaming, Mark Hichar, Partner at Hinkley Allen, Chris Krafcik, Research Director at Gambling Compliance, and Melissa Blau, CEO at Veltyco Group and iGaming Capital. Again, thank you all for joining us today. I hope we can have this go off without a hitch, without any technical difficulties. And this is a live event. Obviously, we've only had the last few hours to digest the ruling itself, but we encourage you to be an active participant in our live event today. You can leave your questions for our speakers and the panel, as well as your own thoughts and comments in the chat, which I know a number of you guys are already using. It is on the right of your screen, beside our main image on the YouTube link. So I'll be looking to the chat throughout the event today to fuel the event discussion. Welcome, everybody. So I think to start things off, I'm going to go over to Mark Hichar, our legal expert of Hinkley Allen. Mark, do you think you could tell us a little bit more about the Supreme Court decision that was issued today from a high level, what it means, and kind of the basics that we should all know?
Sure. Lindsay, I'm still getting the looping, but I'll go forward anyway. And I'll begin by saying that, as you may remember, the PASPA has two parts. One, or that I should say it had two parts, because this decision really was a decision that we were hoping for, as it is a decision that strikes down the PASPA entirely. In a 6-person majority, the Supreme Court decided that both parts of the PASPA are unconstitutional. The court, viewing the first part to be violating the anti-commandeering rule that's part of the 10th Amendment. That first part, as you may remember, prohibits the states from sponsoring, operating, advertising, promoting, or licensing sports betting. The second part acted on individuals and prohibited individuals from taking similar actions pursuant to state law. The court ruled that the first part violated the anti-commandeering rule because it prohibited states from authorizing sports betting, and the court noted the distinction between taking no action and taking action, which was argued by the petitioners, their position being that the PASPA merely required the states to keep their laws in place. But the Supreme Court said that the distinction between taking no action or taking action is really an empty one, and that the states, the federal government directing the states to keep their laws in force violated the anti-commandeering rule, that the federal government can act directly to support a federal policy, but it can't tell the states to support a federal policy, and that's what the PASPA did. I think more
Mark, have we lost you? You still there? Hopefully everyone.
The first and second of the PASPA were intended by Congress to operate together. Be non-existent, they never would have passed the second part. And they used as an example the hypothetical where sports betting was allowed at licensed casinos, but was prohibited by, now I get the looping again, but was prohibited by state lotteries. And the court stated that that would never have been contemplated by Congress, and therefore the second part of PASPA should be stricken along with the first part as well. So in summary, the court in a 6-3 decision struck down both parts of the PASPA and now leaves states free to decide for themselves whether to authorize sports betting.
Thanks very much, Mark. I know that you're struggling with a little bit of a loop back. If you don't have any headphones plugged in, it might be a good time to plug them in. But I think we'll probably just move on to the next question. Chris Grove, maybe you could give us your initial reaction and go off of what Mark has just explained as the basics of the ruling. What was your first reaction in hearing the news, and what do you think this means for our industry, to kind of kick us off here?
Sure. To me, the two big questions going forward are, one, are gambling stakeholders and the professional sports leagues going to be able to get on the same page legislatively when it comes to sports betting? And two, are tribal gaming interests, by and large, going to be able to find a path to comfort with not just land-based sports betting, but also online sports betting? To me, those are the two questions that really frame the discussion around how quickly is this going to move? How many states are we going to see move, at what pace, and in what direction in terms of the kind of product and the kind of availability that they offer? So obviously today's decision opens the door to those conversations, or opens it more widely, I should say, as obviously this has been a live topic for the better part of a year at this point. But it is really a first step, a critical step, but a first step in terms of determining how regulated sports betting is actually going to proceed here in the US market.
Yeah, and I think, speaking of first steps, George Rover, well, how do you think New Jersey is going to react to this ruling? Have you heard anything yet? They're obviously going to be chomping at the bit to get things moving for themselves. And you're just muted now, George, but if you unmute, you can join us.
Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Yes, New Jersey, as you know, is chomping at the bit. I know there was a press conference earlier today with the person who runs Monmouth Racetrack, Mr. Drazen. Mr. Drazen also filed a separate litigation in this matter to join the state of New Jersey in challenging the leagues and the NCAA. And I know for a fact that at the Monmouth racetrack, where he is one of the owners and operators up there, he has a sportsbook operator in place. And he has said today that once New Jersey passes its enabling legislation, he's prepared to go within 2 weeks of that. I think he's probably pretty close to accurate, particularly if we're dealing with the retail sportsbook, which is, the physical sportsbook as opposed to the online. I think the online component, may take a little bit more and will require the New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement folks to be involved. And again, in New Jersey, they have experience with online casino gaming. And so Director Dave Rebuck and Deputy Director Lou Rogacki can address all those issues involving, setting up patron accounts and KYC and geolocation. So I see New Jersey, which is no surprise, sprinting out of the box here very quickly. And I suspect a lot of bills have been poking around over the last week or two, and there is a lot of differences on certain issues. But I think New Jersey legislative folks will come together pretty quickly. And I think they've been pretty clear to the leagues that they're really not interested in an integrity fee component.
Yes. Obviously, the integrity fee can be a big thing. Chris Krafcik, maybe you could tell us a little bit about which states are poised to act right away besides New Jersey. Obviously, some of those states have an integrity fee written into, or what I guess some pending legislation has an integrity fee written in for some states, but of the states out there that have legislated something already in the event of a PASPA repeal, who are they? And will this ruling trigger some other states to either issue new bills or push through existing ones?
Sure, I'll do my best to answer this quickly. It's a complex question, but suffice to say that in the near term, we expect a handful of states, namely Delaware, Mississippi, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, will implement sports betting or expand their existing sports betting offerings. We estimate internally that the implementation or expansion of sports betting in those states, in addition to ongoing sports betting operations in Nevada, will in relatively short order create a patchwork U.S. sports betting market worth nearly $1 billion in annual gross gaming revenue. I'll briefly take us through the status of sports betting in each of the states I just mentioned. In Delaware, under a 2009 law, the Delaware Lottery, via casinos and lottery retail outlets, can offer a limited form of land-based sports betting, specifically parlay wagering on NFL games. We anticipate that the Delaware Lottery will authorize, if any such authorization is even necessary, casinos to implement Las Vegas-style sports books at their properties. We also anticipate that the lottery will consider whether to authorize lottery retail outlets to offer a potentially larger variety of parlay wagers. At our last check with the Delaware Lottery, which was earlier this year, it was in the process of reviewing its options for sports betting expansion with the state's Deputy Attorney General. Moving quickly to Mississippi, under a law enacted there in March 2017, provisions were removed from state gaming statutes that prohibited casinos from offering wagering on the outcome of any athletic event. We anticipate that the Mississippi Gaming Commission will promulgate regulations allowing Mississippi casinos to implement Las Vegas-style sports books at their properties. At our last check with the commission, it told us, quote, "If the chips fall in the right direction and nothing changes in Mississippi, the commission and the casino properties should be able to get rolling within 45 days. So a fairly aggressive timeline, it would appear, for Mississippi. Switching now to New York, under a 2013 law, New York resort casinos will be authorized to offer land-based sports betting. But under pending legislation, that law would be amended to allow resort casinos to offer online sports betting. Notably, a draft version of that legislation, which we obtained last week, would appear to allow non-native brands like Bet365 or Paddy Power Betfair to operate own brand sports betting websites, or so-called skins, in partnership with New York resort casinos. The 2018 New York legislative session adjourns on or around June 20th. So we believe that New York will be a state to watch closely in the coming weeks. Jumping to Pennsylvania, under a law enacted in 2017, land-based and online sports betting will be allowed. Operator licenses will be limited to Pennsylvania casinos. We're unclear, though, on whether non-native brands will be able to operate skins in partnership with Pennsylvania casinos. Although Mark, who's also on this call, I think has a more fine-tuned version or as response to that. Moving quickly ahead, we anticipate that in the near future, there will be discussions among Pennsylvania casinos about whether to lobby to lower the state's 36% tax rate on sports betting gross gaming revenue. And at our last check with the Gaming Control Board in Pennsylvania, which was today, it told us that it could not provide a timetable on the completion and approval of regulations for the launch of sports wagering operations there. Moving to West Virginia, under a law enacted in March 2018, land-based and online sports betting will be permitted. Operator licenses will be limited to West Virginia casinos. The bill is silent on whether non-native brands will be able to operate skins in partnership with West Virginia casinos. And the West Virginia Lottery Commission recently said that it could be up and running, I think, within 90 days of a favorable SCOTUS ruling. And finally, to New Jersey, which George has already touched on. We anticipate that under forthcoming legislation, land-based and online sports betting will be authorized with licenses limited to Atlantic City casinos and New Jersey horse race tracks. We think that legislation will contain a skin-style model for online betting, but we're not exactly sure how that's going to look. We note that under a pending sports betting bill, which I'm sure many of you have already read, it would require skin operators to offer websites that are, quote, branded in a manner to emphasize the identity, end quote, of the casino or racetrack. So sort of Pennsylvania looking there in terms of skins restrictions. Finally, we anticipate that action on New Jersey legislation could come in relatively short order, and that the bill to watch there will be introduced soon, potentially by the Senate President, Stephen Sweeney. So that's a fairly in-depth look at how things are looking at a state level at the time.
Thanks very much, Chris. And I see some comments from the audience. Someone has mentioned integrity fee for New Jersey. Obviously, some sort of legislation still has to be enacted, and what is that going to look like? Does anybody want to speak to that further, the reality of an integrity fee for New Jersey? Mark or Chris or even George, could you tell us a little bit about the climate in New Jersey?
So this is George. Again, we don't know. I mean, there has been some indication in some of the bills floating around that there is some support for an integrity fee. I've had some conversations with other folks saying not. I think it's an open question right now. You know, I've talked to many people to say absolutely not happening, especially since New Jersey spent millions of dollars in litigation. But again, when you're dealing with the legislative process, a lot of things happen. And so everyone has their own personal position on it. And I have my own, but I'm going to keep that to myself. But I do think it's leaning more towards not, but I wouldn't definitively say it could not happen.
Fair enough. I see Seth Young from Foxwoods has left a comment about Connecticut's governor putting out a statement, having a special session to handle this topic as well. Chris Krafcik, did you want to give any further comments on the climate in Connecticut at the moment?
Seth, I think, would be best positioned to give an expert take on what the climate is in Connecticut at the moment. But suffice to say, it looked like things had kind of come to a head in terms of stakeholder lobbying near the end of the session, where I think questions were raised about whether sports wagering as implemented would be violative potentially of the state's tribal gaming compacts. That's going to be an issue that I think is going to be solved. Geez, it's a tough one, and to think that it would be solved quickly in a special session, I don't know. I don't know. It gets me thinking. In a world before PASPA was overturned, I would think that type of lobbying would take a year or more to resolve. But now in this new post-PASPA world, I don't know. I think it's sort of resetting the bar for all of us in terms of what our lobbying logic and assumptions around the issue are. But I think I can say more authoritatively that more states, I think, will probably look at this idea of doing a special session around sports betting. I know that West Virginia, for instance, is looking at something similar, although the West Virginia session would focus more narrowly on the idea of an integrity fee. I'm not sure if that's a very helpful answer, but I think it's more indicative of me kind of getting to grips with what was in play yesterday versus this sort of new world, and what that's going to mean and how it's going to affect lobbying and the trajectory of legislation and issues in states.
Yeah, fair enough. And actually, you brought up an interesting point that I'm hoping maybe Melissa can speak to about tribes. They obviously have an interest in Connecticut, and Melissa, I believe you're from Connecticut. Just your experience working with different online gaming operators. Melissa, I know you've worked with some tribes in the past. What do you think their take is going to be on the decision today? And I guess to a greater extent, could you speak to what the implications of this decision will be for operators and what they need to start moving on now?
There's a lot of questions in there.
Yeah.
First, I wanted to go back just about the integrity fee, and then I'm going to speak to the tribes and then the implications for operators. Having worked in Europe in online gaming for 15 years and having run a white label sportsbook, this is not a new topic that wasn't an issue in Europe. And the way it was addressed is that it was not, the integrity fee did not go through in almost all cases. I understand an argument on why the leagues feel that they deserve a fee. It's their content and we're making money off of their content. But all I can say is that if you look at the profitability of sports wagering on a country by country level, and now you implement that on a state by state level, I urge the leagues to just look at the profitability levels of sports wagering, whether it's retail or online, because it's not a hugely profitable industry with a vast amount of margin in it. It's much more expensive to run than a casino or poker. It's a lot more complicated with many more moving parts, a lot more content and human resource fees to have to be responsible for. So when you start adding in integrity fees in the mix, in addition to the payments, the geolocation, the promotions, the software providers, you start and the gaming tax, you start to get down to a profitability level that's kind of scary. So that's the only argument I want to say about pros and cons of integrity. But when it comes to tribes, it's going to, I think Chris Grove brought this up in the beginning, and it's going to be an interesting situation where how this gets regulated with tribes. An area that I had looked at was Michigan, the state of Michigan, and how even for gaming, they're trying to offer online gaming casino for both casino commercials, the commercial casinos and the tribal casinos. And it's been quite tricky in order to figure out who the tribes pay. Can they be paying gaming commissions? What violates tribe sovereign immunity? So I don't think it's an easy question to answer.
Fair enough. Yeah, I would say it's definitely a very loaded question. Quinton, maybe you could tell us what the ruling you think it will mean for suppliers like Scientific Games, for operators from your perspective. Obviously, having experience in European markets as well, having sportsbook product. What are your first thoughts?
Thanks, Lindsay. My first thought is I think we're getting to a point where the industry can move from analysis to action, and part of that is going to be driven by the way the regulators in the states start defining the framework in which we can operate. So we could stop, for example, making guesses about, hopefully sooner than later, about things like, is it going to be a retail solution in person only, or will it be a mobile application solution? So in those scenarios, we get the clarity, especially within the 5 states that are ready to go live as of today. And I think Chris K spoke to those.
Absolutely. And as for the possibility of a single wallet and making the experience for wagering as smooth as possible, George, do you think you could tell me a little bit about how a single wallet could be a reality somewhere like New Jersey. We know that you can create an account online, you can deposit online, your location's verified, your identity's verified all online. And I know there's some physical in-person requirements that already exist in Nevada today for creating a sports wagering account. What would the ideal model look like for somewhere like New Jersey to get online sports betting up and running?
I think New would, in essence, pattern it after their online casino product. I think that from the standpoint, they have a lot of very good technical people in New Jersey. I used to work with them, and they're just amazing at how they figure things out. And I just don't see this as a big issue for New Jersey. I think that the legislation, obviously, that has to be passed in New Jersey has to make it clear, however, that you are permitted to sign up online. And of course, there's been some talk from some folks that, you have to make that first trip to the casino. I know most people believe that that really is not the way to go. And from a technological standpoint, the New Jersey regulators and their technical folks are definitely willing and able to immediately allow someone, I think, to use their existing wallet. I think my recollection serves me correctly. Recently, it might have been a year or two ago, New Jersey allowed some play with fantasy sports, not DFS, but just fantasy sports. And I'm pretty certain that you're able to, with some technical modifications, the patron was able to use their existing wallet that they use for online casino gaming. So from a New Jersey standpoint, I don't see that as an issue from a technology piece. And as long as the final piece of legislation that will authorize the sports betting in New Jersey allows it, I see online sign up not being a problem, and something that the Division of Gaming Enforcement very much supports.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna ask Melissa a question, just going off of the technologies that you were describing. Melissa, I know you wanted to talk about how existing technologies may or may not be the most adaptable to this huge impending market opportunity. Any comments on online versus retail? What technologies are out there now?
So New Jersey's been live for 4.5 years, and they've done a great job demonstrating that the technologies are there to allow for remote identification so that people do not need to go into the casino to sign up and make their first deposit. And while Nevada has changed and relaxed their laws a little bit so that you don't have to make the first deposit remotely, many of the casinos still don't have the capability to be able to do that, which is a shame, because I think it definitely limits the success of how big this really could be. I think that if you look over back at Europe, what makes sports wagering profitable over there is that it's the access to the ability to wager. In the UK, there are 10,000 betting shops from which to put a land-based wager on in a state the size of Montana. If you go over to France, you'll see that there's 44 places to place either a sports betting wager or a horse racing wager in a land-based environment. If we limit the ability to put a wager on sports in the US, it will have serious implications on the potential success of sports wagering. So I think it was Chris Krejcik who said that the lotteries in some of the states were being considered, and I actually think that would be a really important part of the mix in order to have the success even for the land-based casinos. And the technologies have proven that they work. I mean, GeoComply is a perfect example. When New Jersey launched, there were certainly some pain points for payments, for identification, for a little bit for geolocation, but those pain points were fixed very quickly, and now it has proven that this can work in a state-by-state basis. And so if it is required that players have to go into a land-based casino to sign up, I think that it's not an ideal situation. I mean, I don't know if anyone signed up for a New Jersey sports book, a remote wagering account, but some of the ones that I have signed up for have taken me over an hour.
Yeah, I know it can definitely be a simple experience or a more difficult experience, depending on what the circumstances are.
And to branch off of Melissa's point, I think it's important for policymakers to keep in mind that it's not as if this is all happening in a vacuum. This is happening in a context where state-regulated sports betting is going to be competing against an entrenched, robust, unregulated market that from the start offers a number of advantages that state-regulated operators aren't going to be able to match. Unregulated sports betting sites can allow customers the ability to bet on credit. They offer them a level of anonymity. They offer them the ability to evade taxes. These are core advantages that are just never going to be matched by regulated sports betting sites. So when we start thinking about the process from a customer perspective, it's important to keep in mind that it's not just about creating a product that's good enough in isolation. It also has to be about creating a product from a regulatory point of view, a policy-making point of view, that's good enough to compete with a very robust set of competitors who have been serving the U.S. market now for the better part of 2 decades and who have learned a lot of lessons and honed in on exactly how to cater to that market during that time, leaving the regulated market in a position of having to play catch-up.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Chris, where do you think, Chris Grove, where do you think that the illegal sites will end up in, the next 12 months or beyond? Are they going to lose a bunch of customers? Or I guess a lot of it will depend on the product offering of regulated sites, how fast it all happens, and how convincing it will be for them to switch.
So in the next couple of weeks and months, I think they're actually going to gain quite a few customers because the headline oversimplifies the situation. You're going to see a lot of headlines that say basically Supreme Court makes sports betting legal. And I think you will actually have a lot of customers that will go to the internet, search for a legal sports betting site, and I think we all have an idea of what they're going to find there. So in the near term, I think this is actually a win for offshore sports betting sites. Somewhat humorously, I think in the long term, if regulated sports betting sites are able to act in a competitive manner, if they're not overly burdened by tax rates, license fees, other regulatory overhang, anything that inserts significant friction into the customer experience, I think they will be competitive, and I think that they will have a significant impact on the market size for unregulated sports betting in the US. I'm not so naive as to think that it will disappear entirely, and I don't think any of us are. It won't. But I think a well-regulated, considered product coupled with marketing campaigns that highlight to consumers the difference between regulated sites and unregulated sites, and action by regulators against sites that are promoting unregulated sites, all of that taken together, I think can create an environment where regulated sports betting products have a strong chance of competing effectively against their unregulated counterparts.
Chris, I think we saw that with George, you and myself, when New Jersey launched, and a number of the affiliate sites were promoting both illegal and legal sites on the same site, which created a little bit of confusion. But with a slight bit of education, we all put ourselves on the right track and made sure that that was enforced properly.
Yeah, Liz, if I could jump in here as well, I agree with Melissa, and of course I always agree with Chris. And I do agree that the illegal market will not go away completely for all the reasons that Chris laid out. I think the one additional dynamic that comes into play with this decision that Chris in essence kind of alluded to is now that it's out in the open, the United States is able to use the power of the federal government to go after some of the, being a former state regulator, there was just so much you could do in going after illegal operations overseas. But when you have the authority of the federal government behind you and their long arm and their ability to interact with foreign governments, I do think that there will be some proactive enforcement actions by the federal government over the next year or two that will make a major dent in some of the big players.
So, George, when New Jersey was going after the sites that were operating poker and casino or marketing to U.S. players, I know that there were letters that were issued, like cease and desist. Do you think that the same actions would be suitable for sports betting? Or I would imagine it needs to be on an entirely different scale.
Yes, I think that same actions, except instead of bluffing like we were doing at the state, the federal government actually has the ability to reach into certain Costa Rica or certain other government areas. Because if you notice, there have been a number of criminal prosecutions involving overseas sports books, but all those prosecutions had as their predicate act some type of organized crime investigation that the feds were working on already. And it turned out that they linked into an overseas sports book. I was in state government. Director Rebuck and I had approached the federal government several times about initiating some investigative and enforcement efforts about overseas sites. And they were interested, but they just really didn't have the resources and the desire to go after it. I think what happened today with this decision, I think changes that. And I think you will see certain U.S. attorneys may be looking at those cases a little bit more favorably now.
Just to jump in here really quickly, this is Chris K. We've talked a lot about how regulators and legislators may craft tools to attack operators. But one of the things that I just wanted to note and kind of open for conversation, both to panelists and folks that are tuned in, last month, I think I attended a sports law conference at UC Berkeley, and A.G. Burnett, the former chairman of the Gaming Control Board in Nevada, and Frank Fahrenkopf, the ex-CEO of the American Gaming Association, were in agreement on an interesting policy point that I admittedly haven't given much thought to, which was rather than, or in addition to, going after the operator, we're also going to sort of put in place some kind of prohibition that would target folks that actually bet with illegal sites. And what I'm wondering is, like, how effective or how enforceable would that be? And would it be more effective or enforceable if it were implemented at, say, the state level or at the federal level? I just really haven't fully thought through it. And I just wondered if anybody on the panel or that's tuned in had a good view on that. Thanks.
Well, again, I'll weigh in briefly. Obviously, something similar to that has been done with respect to prostitution, and in certain areas, obviously, they prosecuted the John. And obviously, the idea is, if you take away the demand, you can start to address the problem. But if you notice, those operations in that area don't happen all that often, and there are just certain things that law enforcement and actually political folk don't like to stigmatize or to go after the individual citizen, even though they know it is illegal, especially when you're dealing with behavior that arguably is consensual and is not affecting any third parties or involving violence or something. So it's a very good point. I think there's some history to show that in certain areas that has been done. I just don't know if there's a full appetite to pursue that, but I'm sure it will be discussed.
And Chris, this is Quinton. I'd add that historically, the framework of laws that we do have in the United States did not, in fact, even at the state level, in most cases, don't target the actual individual. So I think that would be a bit of a sea change for the U.S. with respect to gambling. And maybe Mark has an opinion on that as well.
This is Chris, guys. Thanks very much for the replies. I think I was sort of surprised to hear it coming from, the former chairman of the Nevada Gaming Control Board and from the ex-CEO of the American Gaming Association. I think I had been thinking about it on similar terms as you, where it would involve a pretty large sea change in terms of how gambling policy is enforced. But just thought I'd raise it given the stature of the gentleman that had raised the issue.
And Mark, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that? And if not, that's completely fine. Let me jump to something that has been coming up in the chat, but we haven't touched upon yet, which is daily fantasy sports. There's been some questions around what daily fantasy sports operators will be doing? Are they going to jump into the sports betting game? Will they be using their existing databases? Where does this leave them? They're kind of hanging in between, and obviously still subjected to the Wire Act, even if UGIA does not apply to them. Maybe I can just open it up to all of our panelists. What are your thoughts on where this will leave fantasy?
Can I comment? I had co-founded a fantasy company, and I've been speaking with one of the daily fantasy companies in an unofficial capacity. I think that they are very well positioned to take advantage of this. They have a lot of experience on the regulatory/lobbying side that they've been having to deal with, partially through their own fault. They also are sitting on very vast databases of people who clearly follow sports, whether they do it through a sports wagering or fantasy capacity. They're clearly sports enthusiasts that are willing to put their wallet down to participate. And I think that where they fall will depend on the state, and whether they come in as a white label or whether they come in as a marketing company / affiliate, or whether they come in directly as an operator, I think will vary depending on the state. But I do definitely think that they have a place in this market.
Yeah, and I guess maybe that leads into a good question about what will happen in the U.S. landscape as a whole in the next 12 months and beyond. Who are going to be the first movers, maybe from a brand and platform perspective? Who's going to go live first? Where are we going to see the first action?
This is Chris Grove. I'll take that one. I think it's going to be in New Jersey. Delaware can probably contest and might beat New Jersey to the punch, but I think that New Jersey is well positioned to move with a breathtaking speed, especially for the typical pace of lawmaking in our country. So I think that's where you'll see the first action on the state side, the market side. In terms of positioning, I think you're going to see a lot of activity all at once, and interestingly, from a number of corners that aren't normally represented when you're talking about gambling expansion. I think you're going to see some immediate positioning on the media side, the sports media side especially. I think you're going to see a fair amount of positioning from private equity firms. I do think that we will see a small wave of M&A emerge from this decision. Obviously, that's already been a prevailing trend in the gambling industry so far. I think this decision will accelerate that. And I also think you'll see quite a bit of movement on the VC front and a new ecosystem of startups that are either directly related to sports betting or are sports betting adjacent move quickly on this. So I see New Jersey moving first in terms of state markets, Delaware in there as well. But when you start to back the camera out and look at the stakeholder picture, I think you're going to see some pretty interesting entries from a number of companies whose names aren't usually associated with gambling expansion. And to me, that will be one of the more interesting and arguably one of the more unexpected broadly parts of this story.
And I think we've almost seen that play out with fantasy and the leagues, right? Suddenly, all the sports leagues, the TV networks, they were all huge investors in fantasy sports as it exploded. And, where is this going to leave all of those stakeholders now that they've got a whole new avenue that they could explore? And obviously, it's a little bit confusing with where their interests lie and how they've been participating in lobbying efforts so far. It really mixes things up. I'm curious to see how the leagues will balance that out for themselves and the new parties, like you said, that may join the mix. I'm not sure if anyone else has any thoughts on that too.
Yeah, Lindsay, I again agree with Chris. I think New Jersey's well positioned, and again, I do believe that. I actually thought that Mr. Drazen was taking bets 6 months ago. He's been so ready for this, particularly the retail, the bricks and mortar sports book, accepting those bets. The online and the in-play betting may lag a little bit in New Jersey because there's some things that obviously need to be ironed out. But I agree. I think it's hard to argue that it won't begin in New Jersey.
Fair enough. And I'm just looking at the chatter here in the chat room. Gene Johnson, you're saying that Jeff Freeman of the AGA stated that the Wire Act could remain as an impediment to cross-border betting. Mark, if you're still with us, could you talk a little bit about the Wire Act long-term, what this is going to mean for the different states that still need to work through setting up a regulatory regime, if it means that they've already put legislation in place for in-state sports betting, and what this also means for states that maybe haven't passed any legislation yet, but are trying to work out what this looks like in the short and long term for their state. Mark, we can't hear you. I'm hoping you can join us. If not, is anyone else on the call interested in taking that question? Well,
I just have a few thoughts on the Wire Act. I think a lot of people are of the opinion, particularly in New Jersey, that for purposes of intrastate sports betting, the Wire Act is not an impediment in any way, shape, or form. And again, I think they would argue that if you can somehow come to a compact with another state, they would probably argue that the Wire Act also may not present challenges. Now, I know there's legal arguments to the contrary regarding that, but I think New Jersey has shown that they're willing to litigate matters, and I think they're going to be very aggressive in expanding the market in a responsible way. And if the leagues or the federal government have the appetite to take them on, I think in court, I think New Jersey will be prepared to deal with that as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if New Jersey is as aggressive as we expect, and maybe some other states to follow soon behind them, what are the panelists' thoughts on where we're going to be in 5 years? I mean, when you take a step back, we can see that sports betting online casino and poker have been live in a few states in the U.S. for quite a while now. The New Jersey launch was 4.5 years ago. And as we can see, it's an established market and is still seeing growth. For sports betting, if we unleash the floodgates today, what is this landscape going to look like in 5 years? Everyone's thoughts?
I think there's everyone on this panel is qualified to answer that in their own opinion.
Yeah, and I think maybe that would be a great way to cap off our hour here discussion. If we could all have everyone's kind of closing remarks and forward-thinking thoughts on 5 years, what we're really in for, and what this means for us as an industry.
I'll save time and just agree with Chris Grove.
I always agree with Chris, but I might start before him, so I can say something intelligent before he takes it all away. I'm very excited about the prospects of sports wagering. One of the unfortunate things about casino is that we haven't seen another state legislate in a sensible way since New Jersey. Pennsylvania, you can call it what it is. I don't think the tax there is very sensible. I think that sports wagering will usurp a lot of the initiatives for casino, and I think a lot of it stems out of the fact that this is a retail product, not just an online. And I think that given the date, that it's today, that online will be integrated as a thought process in a more intelligent way, whether it is just through the telephone wagering or online as an integrated part of the offering. So, and I think that, in 5 years, we will see an ample number of states have already passed legislation faster than what we've seen with online gaming in casino.
Thanks so much for your thoughts, Melissa. Mark, are you still with us? Did you want to give a a recap. You may not still be on the line. How about we move on? I don't want to put anyone on the spot. Who else wanted to give their closing remarks?
I'd be happy to. This is Krafcik. I think that in 5 to 10 years time, we'll probably have a legal sports betting market composed of 20 to 30, perhaps more states. I would think that if we're talking about a commercial gaming state, I would assume that the license for sports betting is going to be controlled by a gaming entity, but that in some states we may see non-endemic brands or non-native brands operating online betting sites in partnership with the license holders. I'm not exactly sure what taxation, that's going to be a key question, is going to look like. I would imagine that's going to vary probably fairly largely from state to state if it looks anything like the landscape for casino gaming. But that would be really it from a high level for me. I'm sure there's tons more to say, but I want to, obviously, we only have a couple minutes left. I'll leave some room for Chris and others to opine. Thank you.
All right, yeah, Quinton and Chris, I think you are remaining thoughts.
Sure, we're pretty much in line with Chris K's thinking. We, by 2023, are calling for a market that spans 32 states, worth a little north of $6 billion in annual revenue, GGR, and those states will be a mix of states that allow land-based and online sports betting, with some only offering land-based. As we said at the top and really have reiterated throughout, there are a lot of ifs in between now and then. A lot of it really does come down to, can the leagues and gaming stakeholders get on the same page? Can the tribes broadly find a path toward comfort with this issue? And then as Melissa articulated just a second ago, can the product be presented to consumers in a way that is appealing to consumers and competitive with their current options? If we can check all of those boxes, then we think this is a product that does get to the majority of the US in relatively short order and does generate a significant new market for gambling operators, suppliers, and a host of other stakeholders. So if those conditions are met, and those are a lot of ifs with capital I's and capital F's, we think there's a lot of upside here.
Thanks very much, Chris. Quinton, do you want to add anything to tie us off?
Yeah, I think look, this has been something we've all had our eyes on for quite a long time, and we knew at the end of the day we'd know something by the end of June. So having it come down the way that it has, I think, as the panelists have also described, we've opened the door to a lot of possibilities and opportunities. And the rapidity with which the states are moving, I think we have to be cognizant of many of the things Melissa, Chris, and Mark and George have said, which is, put this framework together that provides the flexibility to not only capture the market that already exists, but permit the operators and suppliers to engage in these opportunities in a way that's beneficial not only to them, but to the state and the communities. So I think we have this great opportunity, and I think overall we're looking at this time of flexibility in legislation and regulation that can then be enhanced down the road as we pursue this market opportunity.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Quinton. I really wanted to thank all of our panelists. I know that we were all on standby. We weren't sure if this was going to happen or when exactly this was going to happen. So I think for us as an industry, it's been incredibly exciting and maybe one of the best possible outcomes we could have hoped for. And really, we just need to all see what happens next. And I guess part of it is up to us. I wanted to point out a couple things before everybody leaves us today. Myself, I'm going to be a moderator on a different session scheduled for next week about what happens post-PASPA and going into how Google, Apple, PayPal payments will all support regulated sportsbook. So I will post something in the comments here on our video, and I hope you can all join. And I'm also speaking at a conference in July in Cleveland, the Nickel G's regulatory conference, and would love to promote that fantastic event that's put on by a number of our friends in the industry as well. So thank you all again. I will close us off here. Thank you for joining us, and speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you very
everyone.
much.
And thanks to the audience.
Bye
Great
all. Thank you all.
participation.